Welcome to another Model A repair guide. Today we're looking at horns, how to test them, take them apart, and do some basic repairs. The situation that I want to explore in this guide is you have a horn, you're not sure if it works or maybe it doesn't work very well, and you want to fix it but you're not sure how. The main thing that I'm not going to cover in this guide is how to rewind or repair the armature and the field coils, or how to resolder the brushes and terminals. So if you are hoping for that, then this is not the video for you. I send those jobs off to a professional. I'm also not going to cover aesthetics like painting the horn or installing the screen in the horn bell. So if you've got a Model A horn, probably looks something like this. If your horn is chrome, you probably have a Hutchins horn, which were reproduction horns made in the 1950s. That is also outside the purview of this guide. But assuming that your horn looks like this, and you want to take it apart and try repairing it, the very first thing you want to do, even before you take it off the car, is disconnect the battery. Power to the horn on a Model A is live at all times, so go disconnect the battery, do that first. The next step, again, before you take it off the car, is you got to take the motor cover off. Now there should be a large and a small screw sticking out of the back of the cover. You want to loosen the small screw until the cover comes off. And be careful not to lose the screw or the lock washer. What I like to do is once I get this off, I just let it sit right there in the motor cover and then put the motor cover somewhere safe. Now, when you get the cover off, assuming that your horn is still plugged in on the car, you're going to see two bullet connectors that are plugged into these copper terminals. You need to remove these connectors. Now, they might be plugged in like this, kind of in through here, or they might be plugged in into the sides. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter which one goes to which terminal, just carefully pull them out. They've got little nubs, and so you'll have to pull hard enough to disengage them from the terminals. Once those connectors are removed, then you can loosen the bolt that secures the horn bracket to the headlight bar. And what I like to do is once you've gotten that bolt off and gotten the bracket off, just put the bolt back on so that while you're working on this, there's no chance that your headlight falls right off. That would be bad. So now you got your horn off the car and on the bench. The first task is to see whether the motor works. So just take the armature and try to spin it with your fingers. Try to feel whether it's sticking or binding. Is it smooth? If you're hearing a kind of a pop, 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 pop as you do it, that means the ratchet is hitting on the diaphragm. So back off the adjustment screw and try again. So if it's spinning pretty freely, what a good thing to do is power up the motor. So to do this, you just have to connect a 6-volt battery across the terminals. Now I've got, I don't know if you can see, so I've got a digital power supply here. So I've got 6 volts dialed in. I'm just going to connect my leads. And it really doesn't matter which one goes where, and I'm going to power it up. Okay, so you can see this one spins pretty well, the brushes are making good contact, and there's no arcing at the field coils. Now the power supply told me that it was drawing about 4.5 amps, and that's pretty normal. Anything from 4 to 6 amps, I would say, is quite normal. If it's drawing, I don't know, if it's drawing 10 amps, that's a lot. I would be worried about that. So if your motor spins up when it's powered, then most likely your field coils and your armature are fundamentally okay. If it doesn't spin up when you do that, then you probably need to take this horn to a professional or find another horn. Now the one caveat that I'll say about this, so this particular horn, when I got it, it didn't work. And I did this exact thing. I put it on the bench and I had the cover off and I powered it up and I could see that there was arcing. So I don't know if you can see here, but there's these this sort of paper insulators between these windings and the this piece of iron here that the magnetic field is generated in. And these can't touch each other, so there has to be this insulation between them. Over here, that insulation had kind of been cut off, and so these wires were touching, and so I could see when I hooked it up there were sparks right here between these windings and the iron. And so what I did was I got liquid electrical tape, and what I did was I sort of pried the wires away, made sure that there was no contact, and then I just painted this whole thing right here with liquid electrical tape. And that has served really well. So sometimes there's a quick fix, but usually if it's not spinning up when you apply power, then you've got more serious problems than we're going to deal with here. Now your next step is to figure out, or try to figure out, who the manufacturer was. So everybody knows Spartan horns, but in fact there were 5 different manufacturers of Model A horns, 3 in the early years and then 2 more later on. And there were variations in construction. Each manufacturer built their horns a little differently, and across the 4 years the Model A was sold, there were variations within each manufacturer. So it's important to figure out, to at least try to figure out who built it. Now, the first place to look is on the horn cover. So if you can see, this one says Spartan right here. And the next place to look is on the motor base. So I don't know if you can see, but it says Spartan right there. Yeah, that's a better angle. There you go, Spartan. See that? Okay. All right, so we can be pretty sure that this is a Spartan horn. Now, here's another one. Okay, so this one, nothing on the motor cover. But for this one, I've got, so this is the motor base. And I don't think you'll be able to see this. Maybe you can see. I'll see if I can zoom in, but it says, in very faint script, it says Stuart Warner, made in USA right here. For almost all of these, you should be able to find the manufacturer logo on the motor base somewhere. Some of them are big and obvious, some of them are really tiny, but it should be written here. Usually you just have to know where to look and you'll find the logo. So the manufacturer is very important, because as far as reproduction parts, only the Spartan parts are being reproduced. Now, these parts are somewhat compatible with other manufacturers, particularly as you get later, to 29 and 30 and 31, there starts to be more commonality. But on non-Spartan horns, there are going to probably be parts on those horns that you just can't replace unless you get a sacrificial parts horn and cannibalize it from the same vendor. Now, A&L sells complete reproduction Spartan and Stuart Warner horns, but in this guide, we're looking at repairing the horn you've got. So as we go through the repair process, I want to emphasize, you should be very reluctant to throw any part away. I don't care how rusted it is, how beat up it is. Do not get rid of it until you are absolutely sure that you can replace it. Now, once you figure out the manufacturer, your next step should be to go on the internet and search for any pictures, information that you can find about how the motor is supposed to look, right? Like, look for pictures taken from this angle and this angle. Look for pictures about how the adjustment screw works and how the ratchet wheel looks. See if you can find any pictures. If you have a copy of the restoration guidelines and judging standards, you're going to find some information in there about the manufacturers, particularly about motor covers. but it's not exhaustive. If you really want the details on the parts, you're going to have to go to the internet or to back issues of the association magazines, something like that. So once you're ready to disassemble and clean your horn, the next step is to separate the motor base from the horn bell. And these are held together with carriage bolts. I've taken most of them out already, but they're held together with these carriage bolts that go in this side. You can see it's square holes on the horn bell, and then the nuts are on the other side. So usually you can just remove these with a nut driver. If the pieces are stuck together by gaskets and rust, you've got a few options. With this Spartan horn, you could probably get a putty knife in it, kind of like just get it right in the gap here. Get a putty knife in there and pry them apart. But for example, so this Stewart Warner horn that I've got, you can see this horn bell has this flange going around the outside. So the motor base fits into it, and you couldn't get a knife in there. This one actually was stuck together with rust when I took it apart. And what I ended up doing was spraying PB Blaster kind of all around, like making a little lake right here. And it would sort of get capillaried into this joint over time. And like the lake would go down, and then I'd spray it again, and the lake would go down, and I'd spray it again. And it took a while, but eventually it loosened up. I had the motor on here, and you just have to be real careful. That's the only thing I'll say is, you know, these parts are not meant to be pulled on. This sheet metal is real thin, and it's real easy to dent it. And these frames are pretty, there's not a lot to them. So if you're trying to like force these apart, just be real gentle, take it real easy as far as getting those apart if there's rust on them. So once you get all those carriage bolts out and you can get the base and the bell apart, first thing you're going to see here is the diaphragm, and then you've got over here, you've got the ratchet wheel and this tensioning bar. There'll be gaskets here. So this particular gasket, this one, the gasket stuck to the motor base. There's going to be a gasket here, the diaphragm, and then a gasket on the other side, and then the horn bell. One thing to note, so here on the Spartan motor base, there's a nub, this little nub on the rim. You can see it's punched out on the other side. This nub fits into this locating hole. Pick it up so you can see it. So there's this locating hole on the diaphragm, and that aligns this little mount, this little pokey-uppy thing on the diaphragm to be hit by the ratchet. On the Stewart Warner motor base, there's no nub. I guess they just trusted you to kind of eyeball it. What you want to do now is carefully disassemble the motor until you can get the armature out. And that will allow you to clean the armature and the oiling felts. Now there's a procedure in the red book. If you look under horn, there's a whole procedure in here. If you follow that procedure, you'll do fine. Just be careful, and as I said, save all the pieces. Kind of the Cliff's Notes version of the red book procedure is you gotta take this screw out, which releases the connector block. Unless you have a Stewart Warner horn, because if you have a Stewart Warner horn, this isn't a screw, this is a rivet. So if you've got a rivet here, that's a good indication you might have a Stewart Warner horn. This won't be a screw, this will a nut, this will be a rivet, and you just are gonna have to drill that rivet out. There's no other way to do it. So once you get the connector block off, then you take this ratchet tension clip off, then you take the ratchet wheel off, then you separate the motor frame from the base with these nuts here, and then the armature should come out, and then at that point you can remove the adjustment screw. Then you'll basically have the whole thing apart. The one thing I'll say about disassembly, the red book tells you that you should, in order to loosen the ratchet nut, because the ratchet's on the end of the armature, right? So what they want you to do is they want you to take a metal ruler and carefully put it into one of these slots in the armature so it goes up against the iron there, and so that the armature can't turn as you take the ratchet nut off. That just makes me nervous doing that. So a better way to do it is to get some vise pads and put the motor base in your vise so that the pads grip the armature on either side. This won't hurt the motor, and it gives you more than enough holding power to get the nut off. Okay, so once you've taken all that apart, you'll be looking at something like this. Now, this is not that Spartan horn. This is a Stewart Warner horn that I've already disassembled. So at this point, once you've gotten down here, this is where you want to go through and determine which parts can be saved and which should be replaced. And I'll just talk through some examples that I encountered with this horn. Just go through these. So this horn bell, severely rusted out on the inside, but savable. It had enough, so took all the rust off and primered it and left it. This motor base was in pretty good shape. There was a lot of rust here, which I've tried to take down to bare metal. This is gonna have a gasket on it, so it doesn't have to be painted. The motor base in particular is something you definitely want to try to save. This was the original, or the diaphragm that was in it. You can see pretty badly rusted, and if I give it a tap here, not sounding that great. Compare it to the other one. So that sounds much better. So this one, because the rust was pretty bad on it, although this side looks okay, because the rust was pretty bad, I've taken this off. I'm trying a new diaphragm. I won't throw this away though, just in case this turns out to be savable. Maybe I can do something with it later. Maybe this one turns out to suck. But one thing I do, so I'll save this and put it away. But one thing to notice is these are painted black. So this came painted black from the factory. When you buy them from the vendors, they're not painted at all. You've got to put a real light coating on it. I erred on the side of less paint, because the more paint on it, the less resonant it is. But you need to paint it so that it doesn't rust. So I just gave it a couple of quick sprays, and hopefully that's going to be enough. So just working upward kind of through the horn. This is the horn tension clip. Again, this shape is specific to the Stewart Warner. If you look at this compared with the clip on the Spartan, you'll see they're very different. So again, that's something where you need to make a decision. Can you save this? The ratchet wheel is a particularly interesting case. So here's the armature. The ratchet wheel is going to go on the end of this armature here. And if you look, you can see this is not, it's not a circle. There's a keyway in it. This is specific to Stewart Warners. Spartans didn't have this keyway, but the Stewart Warners do. And it is specific to the Stewart Warner armature. So this armature has a keyway on it, and you fit this on, and it can't rotate. The other thing that's interesting here is the nut that secures the ratchet wheel on a Stewart Warner. It is left-handed thread. So this is lefty-tighty, righty-loosey, as it were. So you turn this as if you are unscrewing it, but you're actually screwing it. And I always have to remember, I always start out doing it the wrong way. You look like you're unscrewing it, but you're not. So Stewart Warner really was worried about this thing coming off. So they took the keyway, they put the opposite thread on it. And one other important thing here, so you see, I don't know if you can see, but the end of the armature extends out just a little bit beyond the nut. And that's important because the end of the armature is going to press on this clip. You can actually kind of see there's a little dot where it has worn a little bit away at the clip. Now, the vendors sell this lock washer for the ratchet nut. If you put this lock washer on a Stewart Warner horn, you'll push this nut out past the end of the axle. And so the clip will be wearing on the nut, which has a much wider surface area and is presumably not made of the same material. So this lock washer is designed for Spartan horns. Maybe it'll work with some of the other manufacturers, I don't know, but it won't work with Stewart Warner. So that's a case where you really need to, don't just order everything in the catalog. You need to understand what you're putting in. So just make sure that you still have the axle proud of the nut when you're finished with the assembly. Now this is the original terminal block, and you can see it's got that rivet in there. I had to drill and then punch that rivet out. There's really no other way to do it. And then you've got this phenolic, and on mine, this phenolic had cracked, the one on the bottom. And so because of that and because of the rivet, I elected to get this new part, which seems like it's a perfect substitute, and this has the Spartan style screw. So that's going to be kind of a permanent change on this, not going back to the original manufacturer because I don't have a rivet that does this, and I wouldn't want to put a rivet in anyway. It's a pain. But again, I will keep these phenolics, even though this one's broken. I could glue this. I'm going to keep these phenolics just in case something happens, or these prove to be inadequate in some way. Note that so they're going to send you, when you buy these, they send you this kind of just disassembled, and the way you want it is nut, washer. You want the rectangular insulating pad, and then this kind of H-shaped pad, and then the insulating washer, lock washer, and then the screw. So that's the order they go in. So the last thing that's kind of interesting about parts. So take a look. This is the original. This is my original adjusting screw on the Stewart Warner, and this is the, I'm not sure what you call this, the clip that it goes in. So you can see right around, and it's important to know there's serrations cut into this and cut into the screw. You can see these serrations a little better on this replacement part. You can see it's serrated there. And the reason that's done is because the screw is supposed to bite into this clip and kind of go click, 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 click as you adjust the ratchet. Now, because these parts have both rusted, and I clean this up a lot, because these have both rusted, it doesn't really grab those serrations anymore. They're kind of eroded. Now, it's an interesting digression here. Look at this erosion pattern. See how it's just like it's just circular here. Why did this rust? There's a reason. So basically the way this works is this adjustment clip goes here, the screw sticks out like this, and then the motor cover goes over the top. And I'll show you on the Spartan. What you are supposed to have originally, right here, around this, you're supposed to have a felt washer that kind of acts as a little collar or a cuff, to block out dust and rain, because there's a hole right here that this this adjustment screw has to fit through. And so if you've just got the hole and the screw, and it's raining on you or whatever, you're gonna get water in here, and the clearance is such that the water's going to pool, it's gonna get stuck right here because this is right behind the motor cover. And so that's what has happened here. because this one didn't have a felt washer right there. And in fact, you cannot buy a felt washer that goes on these. So that's why this one's rusted out. I have found that you can buy Everbuilt neoprene 5/16 inch washers. So these are rubber washers. You get these at Home Depot. It's like $2 or $3. And this washer is almost exactly the size and width of the felt washer that these came with. So it's an adequate substitute if you don't have the ability to make your own felt washers, which I think most of us don't. If you're interested, this is inner diameter 5/16, outer diameter 11/16. I think the original felt washer is 5/8, and then the original felt washer is 1/8 width. So that'd be like two of these stuck together, but it's going to compress more than rubber would, so I would probably just use one to start out with. Okay, so you have this. So I've got this situation where this is rusted out. It's not going to work very well. So I did choose to get the replacement one. This is the Spartan arrangement where you've got this, there's no serrations here, and then you've got this little clip with the serrations on it, and then you've got this new screw with serrations, and you put that through. And that one's you can kind of hear it clicking. So this one is gonna click pretty well, and these are interchangeable. You can see they're the same length. One of them's a little wider than the other, but it doesn't really make any difference. So this is a case where I'm gonna again go ahead and convert this to kind of a Spartan arrangement because these original parts have been degraded. But as I said, keep those original parts. The last one where I'm making a change, this is the original horn bracket, and I don't know what the best angle for this is, but you can see this is warped. It's at an angle, whereas this is a new horn bracket, so that's straight. So somehow this got torqued, twisted, and if you were to put it on the light bar, your horn would be pointing off slightly to the left. So this is another case where there's not much difference between these. Here's a new one. I've painted it black. I'm gonna use it. So that's a walkthrough of the parts. Just looking at examples of where you have to be careful about making changes if you're not sure what you're doing. Now, in terms of cleaning these parts, the only ones you really need to be careful about are the field coils, the terminals, the oiling felts, and the armature. For the field coils, again, make sure you don't accidentally create a short where these wires are going to contact the frame. These insulating pads, I mean, if you're restoring something that's untouched, it hasn't been opened, these are gonna be 90 years old, they could fall apart, so be real careful. For the terminals, you got this solder connection here. If you break it, it's gonna be a pain. So the most important thing is you can see there's this kind of bump right here on the bottom of each of these. That's where you need to scuff off any corrosion, because the bullet connector is going to come in here and the bump's going to catch it, and that's where it's going to make contact. I'll show you how that works later, but this is the bit that really needs to be cleaned. Now, for the oiling felts, these might be jam-packed with dirt and old oil, and what you want to do, this is one reason I like to break this down as far as possible, just because I get things out of the way. But what you're going to want to do with these is just spray the crap out of them with WD-40 and then rinse it with acetone or another solvent. Make sure you don't use a solvent that's going to take the paint off, but just a gentle solvent, and then pat them dry. So for the armature, all you really need for that is a Scotch-Brite pad and some 320 emery cloth. And what you're going to do, believe it or not, is you're going to chuck one in a cordless drill. So just put the end in the drill like that, and you know, put the chuck on it, and then turn it. And as you turn it, you're going to hold the Scotch-Brite pad kind of right here as it turns, and then you flip it around and you do the other end as it turns, and it cleans right up. It's great. And then for the commutator, you shine that up with a little length of emery cloth. Again, chuck it into the cordless drill and just shine that right up. Just be careful, you know, make sure you're not getting these wires. The next thing, after you clean the commutator, what you want to do is you want to use something soft, maybe like a toothpick, or I actually like to use a plastic spudger. And you just need to go through these lines, these slits between the copper. You want to make sure there's nothing in there that's going to create an arc. So that's all you need to do on these. And once you got these parts cleaned and you've gotten the rust and the grime off of the other parts, then it's time to put things back together. Now, I'm not going to make you watch me assemble this and fast forward. I'm just going to cut to the chase. Okay, so we've got the armature back in, and the brushes are aligned with the commutator, and got the ratchet on the correct way with this nut. And the thing that I'll point out here is when you get to this point, you'll have to sort of remember which side this tensioning clip is supposed to be on. And you've got two clues. I mean, you can look at a picture, but if you look at this, notice that the tensioning clip has this asymmetric edge, and that's going to tell you which side of the circle it's pressing against, so it fits there. And then the other thing is, I don't know if you can see, but see right here, there's these little ridges on this one, but not on that one. And that's because these are here to sit right on either side of that and keep it in place. So you'll get clues from the horn as to how you put it back together. One last note before I put this on, you need to grease right around on the ratchet wheel. So I just use a little super lube for that. And then on the tensioning clip where it's going to make contact with the end of the armature, I put a little axle grease on there. It just helps, obviously it helps with lubrication, and it helps to keep things from rusting. So we've got the ratchet wheel on. I wanted to show you just a little bit about these terminals. So do you remember how in the terminal insulator there's these sort of 5 holes? So the one in the middle is going to be for the screw. The 2 on the side are for the terminals. So these terminals have 2 little fangs that are going to slip into those to secure them. And so you just have to, you got to be patient and slip this under there, get those fangs into it, and then this insulating washer goes on top of the terminals and kind of forces them down into the block, and then you tighten it. If you are doing this and your terminals have only a single fang, then I think you have an Ames. Or maybe it's an EA. You've got a different one, and you just, again, I hope your insulating block is in good condition, because you better keep it. So anyway, once you get these in position like this, you just tighten them down. Now this point where you've just gotten this terminal block in, this is a good time to oil those felts, because the next thing you're going to do is put this adjustment screw on. It's going to be kind of harder to get at those. So just get your handy dandy oiler and put a couple drops. You can, with it apart like this, you can really get it right on the axle, which is what you're trying to do. And you can kind of see, so the reason they tell you, I mean, there's lots of reasons, but one reason they tell you not to over oil these is if you over oil them, what you're going to do is you're just going to saturate this entire felt in oil right out here. And what you will succeed in doing is causing this felt to start trapping a lot of dust and grime, because it's over oiled. So that's just one reason that you don't want to over oil it. Another one, of course, is if you over oil it, it's going to drip down in here. It's going to get on all this stuff. There's lots of reasons, but this is the time to do it. So we've got the adjustment screw on, and before you put this on, remember you want to put a little bit of axle grease right there on the tip, and I'm just using like a toothpick and some Mobil 1 axle grease. It's nothing special. So then once you've got this all assembled, now's the time that you want to run it in, as it were, and so we're gonna just connect these leads, and I've got my power supply on, and we'll see how it runs. Runs pretty good, drawing 4.5 amps, just like the last one. Here's a pro tip: if you do this and you run it for like 30 seconds or so, and you start to be able to smell something, you probably forgot to grease somewhere, because that's probably the smell of hot metal. Either that, or it's the smell of the insulation on your wiring decomposing. But hopefully not. Hopefully you don't get that problem. So now the next thing that you're going to do is assemble the diaphragm and its gaskets. These are real thin paper gaskets, and you get 2, and you put 1 on each side of the diaphragm. Now, according to the normal instructions, you're supposed to assemble these dry, and probably if you assemble them dry, it's going to be okay. But in this case, I did have a lot of rust on both of these surfaces, so they're fairly pitted. And so because I've got pitted mating surfaces, I'm just going to give these guys a little bit of non-hardening gasket sealer. Just a little coat, just to be safe. Because this thing is out in the weather, and we really are trying to keep water out of it. So sealing the gaskets, I think, is a reasonable precaution. All right, so what I've done is I got the gasket sealer on those, and I put the gaskets 1 on each side. I only gasket sealed one side. I sealed the side that was along this pitted surface. I didn't seal the diaphragm side. That way you can kind of pick things up and adjust it, get it just right. The way that on the Stewart Warners, because they don't have the little locating nub, what I did was, you've got the seam of the horn bell, that's on the bottom. You see you've got your drain here. So that's kind of the line, and then the motor is on the top side. So you line up the motor and the base, and then the nub on the diaphragm goes kind of vertically through there. So you just line all those up using this seam as kind of your indicator of where the bottom is. So you get all those lined up. And what I've done is just attach these carriage bolts just as a test to tighten it up and make sure everything's in good shape. Notice I've put my little washer on here. So now we're ready to do another test. So I got my 6 volts on here. And when you're doing this test with the diaphragm, you want to mimic, when you hit the horn button, it's just beep, 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 real close. So you're just going to turn it on and off, because this thing is loud. There you go. That's all there is to it. So now what we're going to do is going to take these long ones out. You can see I've got the two long carriage bolts are on the top. That's because they got to go through the bracket. Bracket goes on the bolt. It goes on the nut side like this. So we've got the bracket on, tightened all these down. This thing's ready to go back on the car and get its cover put on. Now remember, you don't put the cover on until you've got it back on the car and the bracket connected and the power connected. So the one last thing I want to show you is it's very common to find these with the connectors stuck through here. But that is not the way you are supposed to do it. So you see there's a kind of a channel in this insulator block, and there's a little bump on it. And what you are supposed to do is just slide this in the side and push through, and it'll click and hold. And that is how they are supposed to connect. Now, the problem is, if I just sort of mock up this cover, what you'll see is the place where the conduit for the wires is supposed to come in, right at the bottom, that's right here. So what that means is your wires have to have enough flexibility and enough length to do this hairpin turn, come out and then come back in the sides. Now, if you've got a new or to-spec wiring harness, that'll probably work. If your wiring harness is not to spec, that may not work. You may need to kind of work some of the wiring through the loom, kind of work it up in the conduit, work it through the loom, and kind of try to get a couple extra inches on it so that it'll make that turn. But that is the way you're supposed to do it. Now, if you just can't do that, and if it works for you to jam them in here, that's fine. Do what you got to do. But you can see actually these on mine, these are actually too small. They won't go in there. But I believe the regulation ones on the Model A will. So one in one side, one in the other. Again, doesn't really matter which one goes in which side. Maybe look at where you've got more length. And so then what you're going to do is put your motor cover on. You kind of line it up with the adjusting screw. You got to kind of feel for where the hole is. Start tightening this down. Now, one note, so you can see how this screw is not threaded all the way. It's only threaded a very short way. If you've got a screw that is threaded all the way, be very careful, because you can't just start tightening this down and assume that it's going to tighten up at some point. You'll just tighten this straight through all the way down, and what'll happen is you'll go straight through and ground it against the brushes, and that would be bad. Don't do that. So just be careful on that. All right. If you guys have any questions about horns, I guess leave them in the comments. I'll try to answer them. Thanks.